like this type of specific abnormal stuff, have you
We are, yeah. Two-person teams.
Oh, they're not making the email change now?
I think they.
Oh, they did, yeah, they did.
Yeah, it's there. Should be.
Can you have your mesh box?
No.
DJ?
It's just you missed
You mesh docs at Gmail, yeah.
The coach is really yelling at us for that.
Right.
Where's the stand go? Oh. It's been that kind of day. I don't know what you're saying. Did you not send them the round 8 out? Okay, so then what's the problem? No.
It is around the
As long as it doesn't say the word envision, it says affirm, it is the yes.
Alright, everybody got it?
He says he's ready, and then there's another barrier.
That was nice.
The debate over healthcare cuts to the heart of political disagreements over the proper function of the state in terms of social inclusion within the United States. Though there have been efforts to provide black people with access to health insurance, we are still faced with an attitudinal barrier of anti-blackness in this culture. A core controversial what constitutions matter, what lives are valued, and what bodies are deserving care. Nelson, 11 health is the policy about the mindful to health and medicine debate is the bearing of the products, political, social ideas in 2010. The most ushered in the most sweeping changes in U.S. health policy since the Medicare, despite having needed partisan bitch over health policy in 1960, controversy the preceding the follow of the implementation act concern, for more about the well-being under loving the patient back and forth. We are stuck on a little decision for Republican versus Democrat, laissez-faire versus interventionist, libertarian versus progressive healthcare reforms about the proper function of the state in very terms of social inclusion on the right. Frame healthcare as concerning national loyalty or African Americans data would have been the beneficiaries of all complaint, adding that the living reforms amounts of reparation and stealing on the Civil Rights Act. Healthcare reform disclosed Wisconsin and competing about the constitutions matter where life providing more bodies for deserving of biomedical care. The one group that has understood this was the Black Panther Party, whose approach to healthcare included social health prevented the destruction of the Black Panther Party led to the establishment of the liberal forms of inclusion to health and that are completely divorced from a larger social health perspective. This leads to a serial policy period where biopolitical management leads to experimentation through race medicine like biology that locates pathology and biology, not social conditions. Now, 7-11. Racial experiences that are the 21st century civil rights poverty, African American mortality from heart disease, significant outpatient that the whites draw the conclusion the race neutral approach has not worked. We are placing our patient on next risk of premature death, dismissing a racial neutral approach to card obviously to define also the missing decades of social scientific racial forms of medical experimentation for the benefit of medical science from the night riders to hinder lifestyle racial information, both healthcare facilities and medical profession. The Black Panthers part of an active critical non-witting station on the road to the Mexican contemporary politics and health and race and sociologist Stephen Anderson has characterized the inclusion of different paradigms. The Black Panther Party understood that health and equality experienced by blacks and other poor was a dialect of neglecting surveillance. First, the party both advanced and rejected theories of health and human difference towards that affects political ends. The second party is rejected outright their suggestion that African Americans might be biologically inferior to genetic science and research, where some debates about race and health and biology have been dormant since before the Panther era. These debates never really went away. The party found that health and not only new more terrain and civil and social rights issues, but also the market African American exclusion. The Panther the parties working together outside mainstream medicine, taking these access to information, determinants, and seeking social welfare. Poor communities' articulation of ideas should be viewed in light of those social economics and like those who demonstrate illustrate following phenomena to Panthers to recognize how medicine can serve as a vehicle social tool and indeed it might as being sent the mission to police and the police are extending up to the political terrain from this vantage. We think you can see the Panthers health politics and provision of medical service and its health education outreach and its social health care. We also struck up the terms of black students through a competition with the authority of biomedical medicine and challenge the process of biomedical racialization of the body. Black body can represent the broader treatment of blacks in the United States community. Control determine healthcare, redefining black people's relationship to the USFG is essential. This is important in producing larger social health perspective in the implementation policy that allows us to overcome the limits of liberal capitalism, serve the double function of physical sustenance and lives, promote work people to enlist in the larger struggle for the party. Nelson, 11 party sector direction of federal anti-poverty programs present much of the organization's life structure programs are probably not level war on poverty. However, acronyms do not really copy the state's programs for social work for concerted rights and more centrally for the margins for this approach. Politics but these activists are harsh critics of the caps and each of the joint also seems that the party social welfare work and that of the federal government for the Panthers are two important distinction that it changes the work from the one that say organization and programs to anticipate the outcomes of the federal anti-poverty programs. They believe represent the full participation of poor and dimension in these programs, but in practice owing ideological difference in the local political structure should make community self-improvement. I think black people should be full because everyone should get who gets an office and promises the same thing in great society. All these names are known real benefits of the nature of actualizing the control of lead. All these are maximizing feasible misunderstanding after one problem programs are rolled back and the parents of somebody. Poors interpret the concept of community control differently. Federal government, local authorities, and freely even not classifies the party. Regarding the war on poverty, these plans were not in poverty, but merely amounts to control and surveillance of the poor within the community service programs. The party more ambitious, revolutionary, into mind. First, you have free breakfast, then you have free medical care, then you have free bus rides, and then soon free run the Panthers believe that something that poor enable local communities to help in the social transform potentially programs from more vehicles to enlist the community and political causes, parties, political causes. Angela Davis, People's Free food programs serve for health purposes, providing sustenance, but also functioning organizing tool people and serve the office when they come out. They take some leaflets sitting on the elementary political education class, culture, country, and exchange ideas. This is a racial war waged on continuously black people are like internal colony for Black Panther. Part of this thing is the securitization of Black Life Builder 15. Blacks constitute an internally colonized community within the United States and thus in a situation comparable to other anti-colonial struggles by so defensive sign on this with the anti-colonial war, a racial fashion award is a continuously permitted award and wage against a black community type of peace that American government and civil institutions often workshop according to the orthodox genuinely specific at all, but rather itself in the form of coded warfare using speech and active theory where argues that something becomes a security instead issued by performing the declaring so traditional rooted in the state position contemporary process of security expanded and group involve issues such as health, drugs, and crime and immigration, a framework is a question of life and death, the power to secure shifting your individual actors from suicide who engage in struggle with political issues that have elevate into a central class applied to the Black Panthers. You can see the new consensus on the central offensive black community represents such an active societal security. We must do the social security can shed light on memory, image mergers, politics outside of the state's sovereignty, future security, and performative process. Also, I see the power to call the mercy on equal distributed across the social body. Newton used the anthropology, sociology, sharpen the argument of hidden word against black. Thus, it becomes an opposite force that they would not try to be self-murdered into a jury. Thus, Charles and I affirm our order which the Black Panther Party provides free health care to black people within full support and funding from the United States federal government. The Black Panthers' vision of medical self-defense is key to revisioning healthcare in a pragmatic sense. This method provides a construction and maintenance of clinics that can deal with the health needs and link to larger social platform, which illness is seen as a link to social conditions, not merely biology. More it challenges biomedical authority by establishing a lay networks of practitioners. Nelson 11. The party's focus on healthcare as well as practical and ideological provided by free community healthcare service for education around against the medical industrial complex. Black Panther political tracks for offered examples of economic racial oppression, literally damage body families, communities. The Black Panther exposed the mission to power whether it's in hands of deployment policy to physicians or the use of the Panthers also engage in medical self-defense party. Missouri Huggins, Elaine Brown, her nursing professor, Mary Burns, Dr. Terry Cooper, all established the chapter's free medical, the People's Free Medical Clinic. The Panthers advocated for providing healthcare for incarcerated persons. The Panthers advocated for followers for Dan John. And Mile, Federal with physicians, as well as political thinkers, Mount established the Barefoot Doctors Lane Health Network worker program. The Black Panther Party is a part of a long history, so a medical civil rights movement using the three major tactics of institution building, integration into the politics of knowledge to challenge medical knowledge and practice. This use of these tactics and also to provide challenges to the limits of state politics without debating the cause of healthcare as a human right for black people. Nelson 11. The party was engaging with how the black Americans have for generations fought the life or death states who racialized and health inequality. The Panthers were heirs to the health activism directly reflected tactics drawn from tradition, health and politics, combined attention to practical needs, the reframing of definitions, states of law, black well-being, including institution building, integration, and more inclusion in the politics clause establishment, parallel principles, alternative health initiative, the autonomous organization to compensate for the policy of the accessible health care option. The black experience in the United States have been punctuated by academics in case of the human and scientific and capital resources allocated on public health agencies to correct the evidence, also insufficient integration of their organizing with the black health advocates for the 21st century. Second important tactic they push for comparable share for the service black and white medical practitioner and patients. Third tactic taken by black health activists, politics, and also pursue intellectual project, conceptual intervention that in very degrees challenge medical authorities, disrupt the biomedical research, activists reinterpreted scientific findings, conducting independent research programs that often avoid scientific analysis of Jamaican racism and rationality was the root of scientific claims about the alleged inferiority of African Americans attacked and opened up the way for black well-being to be assessed in the context of issues of social justice and racial equality. Some agree the factors made use of all of the created alternative spaces for human medical training for blacks and demanded inclusion in racial equality medicine. They pose epistemological challenges to biomedical claims about race. The app produces extra medical advocacy. The clinics do not just operate through medicine, but forms of patient advocacy in society to help strengthen challenges to racist capitalist violence and sectors of housing, economics, and legislation. Nelson 11, the operation of clinics and defeated by Lady Julie, the Black Panther rank and file the ability to mobilize local research path and project working with the local trust companies, volunteers, including nurses, doctors, students, and health professionals to administer basic preventive and diagnostic testing for lead poisoning or hypertension, other condition. In some instances, they implement services demonstrated for referrals to other facilities for more intensive treatment. The party also made actual medical patient advocacy. Black Panthers will also double clinics and clients to navigate housing and employment, social welfare programs, and simply matters. Activists conducting health service and outreach and education in homes, parks, churches, and other venues. Black Panther police should also engage in public debates about the significance and ratio of health, fitness, and medical care via newspaper interaction, mainstream media, and the legislative process. The Black Utopian fiat is important in developing grammar for Black Panther and producing topical debates about the resolution, which does not leave blacks in the position of the unthought through these process debates. We are able to imagine black people's decision makers who can produce lateral black care 116. Black hair is a political type of business operation since we need to account for some other provide those spirit or soul of Nike. Black hair is a network of strategies, practice, intelligence, circulation, communication, sharing of also target with objects not to render sign and cypherable sense to needing rest outside of the benefits award which is inside the practice, a lot of practice, circulation, sharing, and then the operation black hair emphasizes to practice much of the division of medical supplies and working through alone there. I think here that I have in mind where I turn the communication even in point when this feeling is completely deciphered, it can still give form much like a hieroglyph. I hesitate to use the word healing since it's often assigned to medicals overcoming domination. Anti-black violence continues. Mark, I continue.
Alright, good. This is a weird question, but what is the status of the plan?
Conditional?
Why is that fair for the negative?
Or, not, sorry, unconditional, my bad.
It's unconditional. Okay, so you will definitely go for the plan text in the
What do you mean plan text? What do you mean plan
Like,
text? We've
obviously,
affirmed advocacy
we know what you're getting at, like, yeah, like our explanation of,
did
if
take
you,
the plan text
why
in
don't
the
you
last
just
round,
ask
so
us
I'm just-
questions about what Black Fiat
What
does,
is
so
your
you don't feel
threshold
that we have,
for defending the advocacy? I
Sorry,
don't understand.
There was a lot of overlap.
So, all right, so what I'm asking you then is define the threshold for like the unconditional defense of an advocacy in your mind.
Last round, you did not defend hypothetical.
False. I think that we did.
identification
I think that we did. And I think that the judges said themselves that we were not
Okay,
shifty about
then I
that.
guess what defines Black utopian fiat?
right, it's topical action with abnormal implementation or abnormal means, right? So the political climate that you present your disads, your counterplans in is not the political climate of a world in which we envision the Black Panther Party is doing, or providing healthcare services, right?
Like,
The
what do
world-
you mean by that? Like, what about
Right,
the
so for
act necessitates a change in the political?
So you're
climate?
telling me you can't understand why the reconstitution of the Black Panther Party that provides medical
No, I
self-defense
can
for Black people is
understand that. I
different
just
than the
wanted
status
the
quo?
details about it.
What do you mean? We've given the details in the 1C. What is unclear about it?
Like, what is different about the political
So
climate?
there's an archival
post-advocacy?
revival. The Black Panther Party would be reconstituted, and all of their tactics for health and extra medical advocacy would exist to change the political climate, to challenge the current status quo. All the things that were undone by COINTELPRO, we would undo that.
Okay.
COINTELPRO would not be able
What
to
do you,
exist.
like, change the structure, how the government works, the
Well,
necessary trade-offs? that have to
inevitably
happen?
for the Black Panther Party to exist, right?
I don't know why that's true. The Black
What do
Panther
you mean?
Party's not a
For us to
governmental
reconstitute the
institution.
Black Panther Party, we have to change our perception of them from a paramilitary organization as terrorists, which
Yeah,
necessitates
I
the freeing of
understand that
political
portion. I
prisoners
more mean, like,
and
the, like,
finding the
literal
tactics that were in
composition of the
context of
government.
health. What?
I more like mean like the literal.
Like
composition.
literally, the government would have to stop seeing the Panthers as a national security
Yeah.
threat
Okay,
and get
cool.
out
So
of
that's
the
what that
way
is.
of their politics.
Perfect. For your piece of Nelson, or one of the pieces of Nelson evidence in
Which one?
the extra medical advocacy
Sure.
piece of it says that the clinics help clients to navigate housing, employment, social welfare programs, and similar matters. Is this a fiated mandated plan or just an effective plan?
Well, it's part of the advocacy because it includes a theory of medical self-defense, which is clear in the advocacy, which assumes a social health perspective. So health is not just biological.
The plan just says that you give free health care to all Black
No,
individuals.
the advocacy is that entire tag, which includes the Black
The
Panther's
portion
vision of
the
medical
advocacy text I wanna ask about
self-defense.
is the free
The-
health care to all Black people, full support and funding from the United States federal government. Is it like a voucher
No,
for-
next sentence is the Black Panther Party's vision of medical self-defense is key to re-envisioning healthcare in a pragmatic
It's
sense.
not-
That theory
yes,
of
I
medical
understand that.
self-defense
My question
is
is
explained.
that like a voucher for Black individuals to go to hospitals that exist, or can they only go to community health centers? What does that mean?
They go to clinics run by the Black Panther Party.
$9.55.
It's been said. The order is 5 often in the case.
It's already shorter,
I want a short one.
because we are small.
Is anyone not ready?
First Office Services, NHI, is the collection and distribution of funds to providers to defray expenditures for healthcare. All health service evaluation, training, education, actual provision of care is NHS, while needing National Health Insurance and National Health Service are often used synonymously. In fact, they have different meanings. National Health Insurance means the collection and distribution of funds to providers to defray the expenditures for healthcare. National Health Service means the system of delivery of care to recipients, planning, provision, and evaluation of health services, responsibility for recruitment, education, and training. National Health Insurance is essentially a bill-paying activity allowing NHI to encompass NHS and limits the topic, enables the act to tack on any government service proposal. The plan which undermines preparedness for all debates. Extra T is a voting issue allowing teams to sever extra topical planks is a moral hazard because it encourages adding plan elements that obviate substantive research and rig the debate for the app by forcing the neg to win T to even win substance. Next off is T. USFG. NHI means any system of socialized health benefits that's covered by the entire federal government. SLE 91 National Health Insurance. Any system of socialized health insurance benefits covering all or nearly all citizens established by federal law, administered by federal government, supported or subsidized by taxation. Federal government is in DC and card online. The federal government is in DC. They're extra topical. They fiat actors that aren't part of the federal government. It's a voting issue advocating actors beyond the federal government. Overstructures negative research burden, which creates incentives for points and monopolization of moral high ground. Denies a role for the negative. Destroys second level understanding and turns the case Grossberg. In 15, the explosion of publication creates too many positions, too many arguments, become impossible to read everything. This has serious consequences. Proliferation of security studies, transition studies, game studies, hip-hop studies, horror studies. While each of them is valuable, stack them create endlessly self-referential closed system of citation, numbering ridiculous circulation of references, one is less likely to produce insightful research and investigation like the open entire history of debate, but who can afford the time and energy? One tends to select sources according to understanding of research as a conversation with difference. One selectively finding those ideas that are already in line with one and assumes one already knows. Complexity goes out the door. Next off is states. Caitlin and I affirm a world in which the Black Panther Party provides free health care to Black people with the full support and funding from the 50 state governments and all relevant sub-federal entities. The BPP's vision of medical self-defense is key to re-envisioning healthcare in a pragmatic sense. This method provides the construction and maintenance of clinics that can deal with health needs and link it to a larger social platform in which illness is seen as linked to social conditions and not mere biology. Moreover, it challenges biomedical authority by establishing lay networks of practitioners. The counterplan solves the AF and causes federal follow-on. Lincoln and 13 AC provides states to apply for an exception from requirements to take and approximate single payer such as more generate and field results. Other states read the entire federal government might follow unified universal would seek to come as close to the benefits of single payer would offer. The first step is to pass legislation calling for creation of such a system. The state agency will receive funding to process and pay health bills. The state will have the authority to set uniform prices and regulate expenditures such as purchase of medical equipment criteria. First state innovation will provide coverage at least as comprehensive as in the ACA standards appear to be easily attainable. Such a state this will almost certainly offer greater access and more comprehensive benefits to integrate a state coordinated system with Medicare administrators would furnish a grant to single payer states for a promise to provide services comprehensive as Medicare waivers to states can be used in combination with other provisions to align Medicare payment and delivery on a basis for single payer arrangement which a state system access to the processor of Medicare would be many of all the advantages of single payer. It seems feasible under current law. There's sufficient administrative flexibility of waivers to achieve a bill alignment and billing Medicare being integrated to single payer seamlessly. Next up is federalism. Healthcare federalism empowers state and local leaders to step up against Trump. Lad 17, the damage Trump's unleashed may not only be bad by the time the Cold War ended. The presidency had become so powerful it was almost impossible. The federal government has been eliminated. The sort of leadership institution of state and local governments are finding new energy centers, advance the bill that would create the nation's first single payer system. Much work remains to be done in universal health insurance that can function effectively at the state level. More important is the shifting political mindset. States have failed to take the initiative because voters have assumed that they don't need to. We are beginning to recognize what a mistake we've made. Massachusetts are miles ahead in providing affordable health. Governors all of the country express their commitment to Paris. There's opportunity and leadership is emerging in local communities. Mark the restoration of a healthier order. Energizing local and state level progressivism defangs the Trump regime and prevents extinction. Bretcher in 17. Actions appear to be being the greatest outpouring of civil resistance in American history. They target nearly every aspect of Trump's agenda. Trump will not be able to continue for a day without the cooperation of some. Will only be able to continue to destructive course of others. Acquiesce Trumpism could rapidly succumb to this enchantment. The time frame depend on a great repudiation. Trump's defeat requires a shift of power, a period of dual power in which Trump remains in office, but he's unable to implement his agenda. Set of practices draws on emerging organizations. Every victory accomplishes a building block. Progressing one immigrant or deportation is a victory through supporting and rebuilding institutions willing and able to resist Trumpian tyranny. Cooperation with anti-Trump politicians is essential. There must be red lines for any cooperation. There can be no support or compromise. Risk legitimating and normalizing his regime and offering him credit for winning by
bipartisan cooperation. We need ensuring money and support for those in local and state government who are fighting Trump. Trump's assault on every aspect of the environment has begun expanding fossil fuel production, both catastrophe, quite literally. The foundation of society, bellicose threats pave the way to war for destruction of humanity. Next off is midterms. Trump's failure on healthcare is driving Democratic midterm success home in 314. The majority of voters consider healthcare to be one of the most important issues for 52% of voters. Healthcare was ranked as a top issue. 53% disapprove of Republican efforts to repeal Obamacare. Healthcare could be a winning issue for them in the 2018 midterm. Republicans can't win on healthcare. This is Trump won. Where can they? Democrats have highlighted Republicans failed attempts to repeal Obamacare, hoping they can lead to more victories in tight races in November. The politics have really shifted on Obamacare. Democratic win is necessary to prevent the collapse of American democracy into Trumpian authoritarianism. Iglesias and 18 Republicans held in both houses of the American government collapse into Trump's authoritarian state. Republicans turn a blind eye. Financial contributions effort to undermine the criminal justice process. Republicans will listen to Trump will grow more and gain a key threat to democratic stability. Institutions will collapse. Understand attack authoritarians win because faithful alliances lead establishment and politicians collaborate. If Democrats gain control of at least one of the House's checks and balances will operate. As a sign, there's been no oversight of the way Trump has acted. Demagogues eventually crossed the line from word to action. The notion that federal judges should be evaluated based on loyalty was no longer scandalous. If the newly Trumpified GOP holds power, the gloves will be off in terms of erosion of democracy, firing civil servants while packing the courts and turning intelligence services into arms of politics. It solves extinction to wall and 16 better for populism to fail early. We are on picking liberal peace. What does a global war look like? State strangling delivers with molten revanchist powers threatening with nuclear weapons and reactionary populism and resembles a war on democracy. Trade wars, territorial disputes, Russia, China, and Turkey bring a facade of stability and war when they fall out. Importance of maintaining public goods, including the future of the planet, remain evergreen. The case. You have an ethical responsibility to stop extinction. Human beings are ends in themselves. Michelle Lesson 17. Humans are ends in themselves. Capacity for action implies an obligation in the form of external responsibility. Responsibility is projected into the future. The preservation of future possibility and politics itself, the point at which self-destruction is possible, imposes duty not to destroy what exists in all other living things for survival. The human must stand behind the bare statement of its precondition, must guarantee the very possibility of responsible actions. All sentient beings have agency. Robinson 4 to give to ordinary people the human agency that they lack. Practices cannot achieve. They presume this is a white structural oppression buries ordinary people alive. I disagree. Pure consciousness is always prior and always sentient beings have agency. Slaves never forgot their innate right to be free. They retain a consciousness that itself was never enslaved to the modern era. Ordinary people like blacks have pure consciousness and human agency. Two, by implication, it negates their identity, social values, and personal responsibility diverges from the real practical control that ordinary people exercise. Their warring arguments about black hair rely on ungrounded psychoanalytic assumptions. Knowing the psychic impact of anything we say is non-falsifiable guesswork. Kudos. In 15, racism is not an integral part of the human psyche. It is a social construct that has a psychic impact, and the effort to comprehend racism by interference is a priority start to be edible, where the collective unconscious is doomed to failure. Refers to the inherited power. The collective unconscious refers to the inherited patterns in all regardless of specific upbringing. Cannot deny that delusions are permanent failures, features of the mind. They are habits acquired from social and cultural imposition. They constitute a collective unconscious, a part of many. They are not universal. That confuses habit with instinct. The socioeconomic is responsible for all affective disorders. Racism cannot be solved on a psychological level. It's not individual. It is social. Disalienation will be achieved only when things in the most materialist sense have resumed their rightful face. Federal provision of care causes mass wait times, which leaves the worst off more vulnerable. Atlas and 17 single payers decades of documented failure to provide care consistently plagued by waiting lists. Dangerous delays for appointments. England 3.9 million are on lists after already waiting for diagnosis. Canada's median wait was 20 weeks. U.S. times before the ACA were shorter. Patients in single payer are dying. Americans enjoy prescription drugs in contrast to single payer. War screening tests facts show that single payer cannot outperform system in routine screening tests. U.S. patients have less advanced disease. Instead of judging reforms by the number of people classified as insured, should focus on making excellent care more available and affordable without restricting innovation. Single payer with decades of experience is permitted to be inferior to the U.S. America's most vulnerable suffering. The systems turn to single payer. The policy details are key to the efficacy of their implementation and should frame how you view their impact arguments. Iglesias in 17, if technocrats don't help the push will end up being unworkable. It's time for wants to start working on healthcare consideration of feasibility. Aren't a halting point for discussion. Wants not to be working in partnership with politicians for the goal. Politicians are setting up unnecessary inter-party fights and not laying the groundwork for success. The tax issue is critical. If you finance with value-added tax, senior citizens will end up paying higher taxes. But if you finance the system with payroll taxes, you are creating a disincentive to work. The policy work would have to be done. There are questions about union workers and public sector workers. The interaction of the new system with existing programs like the VA needs to be thought through. All of this is doable, though very little of it has actually been done. A healthcare plan that was technically sound, probably counterattacking and failed campaigns can help those organized capacity. What they need are concrete policy options that will let the ways, the pros and cons of different approaches. There are details that voters don't really care about, but if you want to pass a law, you need to address them. It's not good enough to assume the solutions will emerge. Nothing is politically feasible from a progressive point of view right now, but nobody knows what avenues may open up. The left wing has a big idea in healthcare, but no plan. It's time for the wants to step up. Scenario analysis is pedagogically valuable. Fitzsimmons, instead of the burden of proof, belongs to decision maker, rejects probabilistic reasoning, value predictions, not rest in getting the correct answer. Rather, why a given event is likely, why it would be important predictions in sources discipline and making assumptions that might otherwise remain implicit. Transparency, the process of arriving, heightened sensitivity towards changes would suggest flexibility, while complexity may resist probabilistic thinking. Risk-oriented approach seems the only model for strategic planning. The alternative approach, good strategy, questioning assumption, critical, but assumption must be made. Unchecked skepticism can empower varietal interests.
Add this plank on states.
New plank to the states kind of plan. The 50 states should provide all necessary support to the Black Panther Party to engage with transnational activists over healthcare practices. States can enable global exchange of best practices to partisan 16 health education and social development usually fall under the portfolio of cities or regions. Other varying foreign policy at the subnational level is healthcare. Subnational governments have intense familiarity with these issues. The provision of human services is generally carried out by municipal and state government. States in different parts of the world have established contact among themselves to enable the exchange of best practices. States are perceived, in particular on health and rights. Galbraith and 17 states have engaged with the issues involved in transnational dimensions, including use of foreign law shared space between local and transnational for greater health, human rights counteractivities, the growing extent to which state governments act in this shift. States constantly emergent activities of transnational implication fills voids left by federal inaction. States work to promote human rights. Celebration of states as guardians of the route feels pressure in the wake of the 2016 election.
And then read that card on midterms.
This one?
Yes.
Dem win in either chamber stops
On
GOP.
midterms. sorry.
On midterms. Dem win in either chamber stops GOP entitlement cuts pro cop. 1-2 Republicans losing the House, the Senate, they lose their ability to send new bills to Trump alone. The conservative legislative agenda would be that filibuster means 60 votes are required. Some Democratic support is already necessary, but Congress can use the reconciliation process. The party could tackle cuts to welfare, food stamps, and Social Security with reconciliation.
I'll send this out right now.
Good.
Yeah, if you want to wait for the cards. I'm good, yeah.
When do the states ever uniformly act together?
Well, states have uniformly acted on.
Or uniform, I guess, in the context of federalism, the government, or yeah, no, all 50 states uniformly enacting a single ideal or policy.
Well-
It stays the same, consistent among all 50 states.
The piece of 1 and C evidence on the state's counterplan says that states can effectively implement universal
It's a
health
yes or no
insurance
question.
policies.
It's
I don't
just a
think
yes or no question. It's out of context of
Well,
your
our
solvency.
argument is
It's
that
have they
healthcare
done
is
it?
a different
Piece of-
domain. Our
Have they
argument-
done it? Yes or no?
No.
Okay,
healthcare
so
a
then what is
different
the
domain. Our
what is the
evidence
value
indicates that
what
the-
is the value of discussing about the political efficacy
I
of them
think
doing
that
so?
federalism DA is probably a reason why discussing the efficacy of like state-federal interactions in context of like anti-racist policies.
If those interactions have never occurred,
What?
why? If
There are
those,
constantly interactions between
Between-
state and the federal government.
Not a
no,
uniformity.
uniformity.
So
Yes.
I think
Okay.
the Lincoln evidence is where we should point to. It indicates that uniform action by the states is the best comparative framework.
The question is, it hasn't occurred. Why are we talking about it?
That's what I was
it's-
about to answer.
okay, cool.
The Lincoln evidence indicates it's the best comparative framework for kind of understanding who should take the role for healthcare policy in the future. It begs the question of different financing provisions, the questions of
Oh yeah, what are
oversight,
those
et cetera.
financing
We think that
provisions?
those
What are those
key
what is the
questions
uniform
of the
financing
topic.
provisions of the states kind of thing? Do they give like do they just all give vouchers? Like what how do you go
It
about
would be the same function as the app, just on the state level.
But what is the
I
app does
don't
not
know
function
yet,
on the
like,
state
I
level,
kept
so
being
that's
cut off in
impossible.
process while asking the question about whether or not it's vouchers or not. Like,
Alright.
that's not on
What's
me
the
to
violation
specify
on
at
the
this
extra
point.
T?
On extra totality?
Yeah.
Well, there's twofold of our violation. One is NHI requires all citizens to be covered by the federal government. Two is
What,
they
we had a
said-
cross-ex about this where we said that is true, like the app does so.
I think our interpretation is in context of the statement in the Let Me See that says.
So what is the interaction between your SLE evidence, which says that health insurance is socialized, and then your Wallace evidence indicates that it's not?
Well, I think the socialized portion that you're taking out of context.
So what does
is that
socialized mean to you?
Covering all or nearly all citizens, that's what the.
That's what
socialized
socialized
context
means.
is. I mean, not in
Okay.
a definitional sense, but in context of
Okay.
national health insurance, yes.
Cool. What about the app emboldens Trump?
I don't think it's an argument about the app itself. The LAD evidence, or rather the piece of LAD evidence indicates that there are state level policies and activism and local level policies and activism that are challenging the Trump administration right now. We would argue that the affirmative affirms the Trump regime and affirms some kind of implementation of it.
That's
So the United States federal government in the advocacy statement, or at least calling on it, allows Trump to kind of the implementation of the app, even if
What
Trump
about
isn't
Trump
one who directly
implementing?
does it.
What about Trump implementing the Black Panthers Party's vision of national health insurance? emboldens his credibility.
Because it takes energy away from progressive movements by making Trump seem like less racist and progressive.
To who? The Panthers? You think that would work
No,
out
to
for
the
Elaine Brown?
activists who
You
are
think
to-
so? You think
diverse
Elaine
group of
Brown?
activists
You think
who are-
Elaine Brown and Alicia Garza are about to be like Trump is cool now?
I don't think we have to win like
You
specific.
kinda do,
activists.
don't
It's
you?
not the Black Panther activists, it's other activists that exist extra to that.
No prep. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Do use prep. Do use prep. I forgot something.
I have the timer.
Yeah. But they don't have any information.
How much did you say?
Okay, so I'm gonna reverse the order of the one and see a little bit. So it's gonna be case, and then we do the TNHI, that's the one about like nearly all citizens. Then the NHST argument. Then I want you to make a separate page called framework. Then states counterplan, federalism, midterms.
Sorry, you said it's
It's the All Lives Matter
Yeah.
thing first, then it's NHS, then framework, then states, then federalism, then midterms.
And the new framework page is after T services.
Got it. All ready? Oh, I'm sorry, I had a delay on my email, that's why that's happening. Did nobody else get it? Is that what happened? Okay. Gotcha. Why did I almost put 9 minutes like this is a 6 minutes like this is?
I was like, oh.
Probably should have.
All good? Alright. But what I see envisions free healthcare for black people funded by the government and implemented by the Black Panther Party. This affirmation is the most desirable option in this debate and solve the most impacts because we are providing health for black people in this space due to the fact that we are able to recover political education tax debt and been lost from the Panther to the coins up for misinformation campaign where we think of them purely as a paramount organization while losing all their taxes and engagement that focus on medical self-defense and role vows to vote for the team who best produces black care. That is our war evidence that talks about needing to circulate these debates about care to do two things. One, produce a greater black complaint and also remove black people from the decision of the unthought in which now we can think about how to care for black people. This imagination is important because it allows us to create political education here where black people can take in things from the Panthers and become better political actors. One, it allows us to create alternative institutions that can solve health disparities. And two, increase the social focus that can challenge biological medicine that creates experimentation and can produce extra medical accuracy, which means that we they can use social conditions as help into the IE housing, local politics, economics, etc. Three, politics of inclusion. Allows us to center on politics of integration that goes beyond liberalism and small concessions, but seriously wrestles with how fully include black people in society with care. Four, government revival requires a fundamental shift of the perception of the Panther Party by the United States federal government as a paramilitary organization, which requires the freedom of political prisoners and produces restitutions for those across generation of black people who have been affected by the political vacuum left by the destruction of the party. The act outweighs the entirety of the negative arguments because they cannot fundamentally prove out of a political dynamic that will always reproduce a cycle of death of black people because of the lack of representation of the above. They have no way to out of failed liberal policies now. Their move to framework conditionality is not an act of care. It is not point of work to undo the Panthers through a misinformation campaign about what their politics meant and devaluing their work in favor of centering those same liberal policymakers that cannot offer care. We are the middle ground between radical black politics and pragmatic construction of black health. This is what I premiere to offer this community as well as a well-known pessimist and debater. This is what we need to do if we are serious about moving forward. They cannot then advocate for the Black Panther Party because you can't be a part-time Panther. Now, the case life on this extension comes first. However, our argument is this is inevitable for black people in the status quo. Our own evidence indicates that what I see is securitizing for black life. Through social actors, they can see that also AIDS vaccines, these still lives the world and makes these impacts inevitable because it operates to produce violence to sustain the civil society. Next is that we can agree with Robinson. That's why we have the advocacy. There's no instrument to warn in there. Next evidence about psychoanalysis, but also there's no impact in this because we engage in pragmatic action, not just complete pessimism. Next is that we solve the terminal impact to shortages because we create extra medical advocacy, but also our medical self-defense theory literally says that we create new networks of doctors. You come in to get health care, but you also get new knowledge on how you can democratize democratize those health practices to help other people. So we create those new things. We agree that scenario discussions could be important, but the scenario discussions that they want to have are still engaged in a false understanding of liberal politics that never offers a way out, which is why ours is better now too. All is better in NHI. One, we need to specify the delivery of care. Two, parent churches in confidence of national health services financed by the government with a private party delivering the care. Now supporting national health services and insurance program from the government through general taxes on the delivery of care by private environment down indicates place in card 9. Proposition indicates place. These are all your Russian national needs in the U.S. Mary.com related to national boundaries reason for top education laws to focus on delivery of care, not just the funding of health insurance. Solves ground get ground on black utopias and bad. Black there's bad focus on health bad. Solves limits based on free health care. Funded by the SMG turn their interests over limiting focus on universal health care last time. Hey, subset focus on black and substance good. Focus on black health is serving good. Peter Skeeter trust social communities of health, but also as they full limits, black feminism creators, trans capitalism and after studies such as better than only being single parents tied to usage funding free health care. Now all of that turns just by sacrificing black people. We must ever be allowed now not actually see our different Chinese that focusing on the delivery of care is part of action and doesn't be implemented by the SMG. Now black fiat from the T action with admirable implementation. What is information we expect to know means because of the consequences of our imagination. Solves we're not that any type of one can include anything reasonably related to ensuring free health care, but also solves trying to do that above now. NHS car supply right from NHL and specify the delivery of care insurance there. Their term is assumes health biological so only will reproduce biological experimentation and also when our Nelson evidence indicates that health is social and not just biological, which they have not answered. The Panthers also engaged in this, so there is a real world precedent now. Cross-class years health education also focuses on delivery of care, solves ground, solves limits, also their interests are limited because it also focuses on bills, which leads to bad process debates framework. We are a black conservative resolution. We are defensive of the USFG funding free health care collective. We want with the BPP implementing delivery of care. That's admirable implementation. Now that benefits black fiat limits the topic. Limit the topic to black to the active methods of the resolution. This is broken 17 study with mental should critical focus on framework which enables police to study the injection of blackness to framework undergraduate institutions individuals interested in the white activities to reveal terms of positivism and aggression aggressive pandering to the very publicly private friendly by the very least the fact that black lives matter this is a part of motion disciplinary frame will frame in a epistemic lens and to study the civism and accept up not to address slavery truthfully as a condition for the find out a historical event. You can market an historical event there should be so living the best model of peace is one that requires black leaders to defend the topic without having to defend the world and the institutions currently constructed done not arbitrary exclusive frameworks on question topic counting issue silencing difference their model of debate just by speak out which is not required by the topic but another arbitrarily excluding admirable means terms limits next in terms mean that black people will just run to the large structural arguments with no relation to the topic which will full limits and destroy credit equity confer reachability over community traditions our items in the middle grab and maintaining reasonableness while allowing us to criticize whether the non-blacks have constructed as the states of the resolution. We have the best stasis point that's our Nelson evidence about care not just insurance. Black identity is important because it is key to black liberation advocacy skills will the adjunct to implementation can shift perception of the party and it's key to us imagine ourselves as the agents of the revolution not just being acted upon. There's no TVA here. There's also no skills are narrow. Since there will be a lawyer politician but also we solve all its better impact is our Arsenal 5. The USA supports a special reward for the groups that have been uniquely oppressed in general and not the blacks have been subjected to cross humanity does not oppose the elimination of all racial disparities in health and really six uniquely bound for claim for lack of quality. Specifically the black of America will require such racial teaching that the tool effects for all of the groups will be significant. This rising tide would lift all both South states count for the complex education being corrupt because it doesn't prioritize the admirable implementation because they're net benefit of some world of normal means, but also we saw the shareholder impact to the carbon because we produce mobilization, but also all of that more of that later on the dispatch permanent to go up the carbon net benefits that we have the defense have never been to slavery is the alliance of one hold the federal government accountable for the life of every prospect having got two blacks and whites federal accountable for the support of a deeply traditional racial hierarchy Rebecca consequences of slavery and Jim Crow now these are actually resident anti-slavery the slave states would have agreed to constitution that tolerated not so vigorously support slavery net benefit is that they must confront on the federal level to free political prisoners because it's an issue of national security. This Allen Bell 2015 the government created special units of assets of federal coercion that this was ruthless in attempts to destroy the Panthers and remain the national security issue because the Panthers is also viewed as a militant increment because of the government saying so the BPP has never been retracted or corrected through the existing official action that's that we need to transnational solidarity solve the structural credibility. Allen Bell 15 rejects that this structure will aid in setting nations course in the right direction. All other countries that they one example of a country seizing timely opportunities to setting good policy motion taking benefit to instant restriction force involves accountability lack of accountability whereas the result of simply critical benefits associated with good governance and third government benefits addressed will further human rights and goals objectives and would also go a long way in gaining global credibility. The United States you can market at the United States. Now let's go on to federalism. Now we saw this as Allen Bell 15 and the counter argument involves a view that executive action involving the BPP members who were in custody essentially charged with exonerating the BPP members who were beginning to see charges of violence physical offensity immunity federal and sovereignty immunity jurisprudence explains how office against the United States to mean federal cases that involve violation of federal statutes and opponents will likely argue that physical original law and teachers who federal set up already exist and they are because of this restructure proposal probably to seek the Trump federal state of Colorado continue to use commonly through task forces, commission theories does not in itself serve traditional notions of sovereignty, coming to your federalism market and federalism. No, we can provide. But we also allow to mobilize local actors. The Black Panther Party is literally engaged in local politics and ran for office, which will lead to a bottom-up portrayed revolutionary based on some midterms. The incentive to make government to justify why we are discussing electoral politics is not that much of a goblin because it offers just pollution measured. The electoral political frame lists and focus on normal means that bad offers or arguments that we need to a new vision are also just overdetermined consistently. Extending the evidence to the impact on ways because we are an internal product within the U.S. but also the internal impacts this said. Also, the affirmative literally would solve all this because the Black Panther Party would not give credibility to Trump, but also they would mobilize a new political climate where we can have Black people go out and vote again. I need water. Go out and vote for people who go for the people in the midterms that would get Trump impeached in the first place. They have to win that. People like Elaine Brown or Black Lives Matter would actually think that Trump is now a better person. We're also the impact is that both such focus why people are racist and will vote for Republicans and Trump quotes 17 Trump white support was not determined by income. Trump won away making less than 50,000 by 20 points. There's Trump assembling a white coalition that can run the game. And the John Structure to the Joe, the bank or white opponents are being too modest. Trump's dominance among whites across class lines is a piece with his larger domination across nearly every white demographic. Next is that. Impeachment is the most likely cause of last shot. They can win office. Full term assaults with their impact. Veterans, Clinton, Senator, 17 Trump's president begins to collapse. He may attack another country. Provocation justified attack on North Korea or Iran would be easy. Trump begins to feel trapped because he can lash out towards Armageddon, Market Ed. Armageddon, Trump's loser tweets civil unrest. This is Cohen 17. How would Trump's hardcore supporters react to the removal of the president for a high crime or misdemeanor that possibly short of triple act murder? Not with evidence. You can be assured the recent skirmishes between here are ultra-nationalists on the far right and so-called Antifa on the far left are recent of the brawls between fascists and communists of weakened German democracy in the 20s and 1930s. Market 1930s.
Alright, good. And the counterinterpretation in the piece of Niles' evidence says, national health insurance is an insurance program funded by the government through general taxes, although the delivery of care is by private providers.
The private provider being the Black Panther Party.
Okay, that was part of my question, but my other question is, does the plan fund through general taxation?
Yes.
What taxes?
General taxation.
What is?
I'm confused.
Okay, that's fine. The Brock evidence indicates that the reason, or the Brock evidence indicates that...
The Brock evidence?
Yeah, the Brock evidence says that there are neoliberal... let me actually pull the line right here.
Go ahead.
It says, unregarded by institutions, canons and individuals entrenched in white academia's neoliberal turfs and terms to positivism. Why isn't the AF that same neoliberal?
Well, we have a couple of pieces of evidence that say that the Black Panther Party is literally in their politics made up for the limits of liberal capitalism by infusing a
right, but this evidence isn't about the limits of liberal capitalism, it's about positivism.
Right,
as a
the rest of
strategy.
the card goes on to say that the reason why these neoliberal Turks are bad is because they only think of slavery as contingent and they don't acknowledge Black Lives Matter, which the AF does all of those things.
Okay, that's fine. The what is the warrant for why the federal government is key to the political prisoners argument?
Right, because the Black Panther Party, a lot of the members were marked as national terrorists, a national security threat.
Right.
That is a COINTELPRO program, which is the FBI. That is federal jurisdiction,
I understand.
Not state jurisdiction.
The argument
and
that
I read a piece of evidence that indicates that this is why, even when there were state charges against Black Panthers, that they were put in federal prisons.
The piece of evidence you read. The piece of evidence you read is in context of, actually, it's fine. The piece of Coates' evidence, where do you think it has? Yes. Where do you think it has a conclusive warrant that says the GOP will win the midterm?
Coates is saying that white people will always vote for racist and sexist candidates, i.e., Republicans or Trump, because they are racist and sexist because of their political.
Okay, but obviously, 100% of white people don't vote for the GOP. Where does this make a conclusive warrant that says they will win the midterm?
Coates is literally arguing that the people who just think it is a matter of racist white people who are not liberals is the problem. That is a conclusive point.
Can you unpack that a little bit for me?
Right,
Trump.
So Coates is saying that we spectacularize the people who voted for Trump to like neo-Nazis and rich people, when the problem is that actually the entire white population, because they want to protect themselves against black people, will vote for racist and sexist candidates.
Okay, that's fine. The piece, why does impeachment cause lash out?
Because he feels trapped, and so he's like, fuck it, I'm going to try and do something.
What is that? Who
to
does he
support
lash
my
out
base.
against?
I'm sorry?
Who does he lash out against?
I actually read that it says North Korea and Iran.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
midterms, TUSFG, the new framework argument, T services, states,
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm gonna need you to repeat.
yeah, midterms, TUSFG, the new framework argument, T services, state, case. Does anyone need that one more time?
Okay, so it's midterms, TUSFG, then it's services,
The framework.
then it's framework, then it's services.
Yeah.
Okay,
Then it's the counterplan and case.
then it's counterplan.
And it should be sent to everybody in the same document got it. Everyone good to go? Sweet. Good.
Oops, you've double turned yourself. All can see that the GOP will win definitely win the midterm because of white people. You all can see that the plan is able to solve it through things like activism, which causes impeachment, that causes lash out North Korea war, which causes extinction according to the 2AC, which means they have offense they can't get out of the TUSFG argument. We're not going for it. It's just a question of whether or not you can fiat extra topical portion of the plan. All can see their counterinterpretation that says NHI is only a question of government financing of care and provision of care by private providers, which you cannot fiat how that care is necessarily given, which all of our extra T arguments aren't necessarily true if they try to go for their black utopian fiat arguments because they fiat all of our solvency deficit, making it impossible to be negative, and also proves their bad faith about their process good arguments because they're not able to say they're able to fiat on things like counterparts and discounts with their new political fiat, which is not a process to be good argument. The framework page there, Kevin, it doesn't solve any of our arguments. Our argument is that if we are going to have in-depth debates about what it means to have enslavement, then the process debates necessarily come first. Cross-apply the Iglesias evidence from case, the details of how policy necessarily matter, and because the consequences necessarily determine how implementation necessarily works, you don't get to fiat a utopian world with the plan. Durable fiat only necessarily means that the plan is on the books, not in a perfect form, which means all of our Ds and counterplans necessarily outweighs and necessarily solve all of their arguments. All of their arguments about white fiat is necessarily good for black debaters. Necessarily, all of our arguments indicate that you have to defend the ways in which the government works. Yes, you can fiat that there, or you can necessarily have the mandate or the plan result in things like extra medical advocacy, but that cannot fiat out of all our solvency deficits and counterplan and DAs, etc. It proves you are not reasonable. And in terms of all of your education arguments, because the topical version of the after all lives matter arguments doesn't necessarily apply to our interpretation, because it's just a question of whether or not you defend the implementation of the plan text. They link to their distancing arguments, given they're not in control of a revitalized Black Panther Party capable of administering tons of health services. They're distancing themselves from the entity capable of generating change. Academic inquiry doesn't create attachment to the state, which proves that normal fiat is good for us. And since objection is utilizing the modern state domain on discourse, in effect, that sanctified states is not possible in such a language. Consider alternatives to the system not well vetted by having recourse to the ordinary language of international relations. I'm not thereby committed to argue that the state system exists in the best mode of a human political organization. My argument is whatever proposals for piecemeal large scale reform state system are made, they must necessarily be made a language. Show modern states doesn't get out of the fucking dock. I can't read the you can use the statements about the state to highlight its failures because it affirms its legitimacy, human and technically demands that states for the end of their coding policies and basic strategies which moves making such demands not this reaffirming its legitimacy demands are made from the outside of political order and they see the question of implementation of that specific measure they call the legitimacy of and even the sovereignty of the state by highlighting inconsistency by a formal order which guarantees the certain inequality of state practices would deny them the T services argument are interpretations that are well said indicates that NHI is only a question of the financing of care provision, which means you cannot fiat certain services because it necessarily shifts the question of the service provision by hospitals, etc., as a distinct question from the question of insurance because it's essentially a bill-paying activity, which is our walls, and their cross-application of their counter-interpretation doesn't help them because the evidence just says that NHI is a question of bill-paying activity. You don't meet them violation their Nelson evidence describes the plan as fiating a broad swath. Did I not send something? The broad swath of changes beyond health insurance, specifically their extra medical action, including housing, economics, and legislation under their interpretation plans. Yeah, literally out of any domestic services, the entire educational topic from high school is now topical
other domestic changes, even if they tack it on to the provision of some health care. They're not even health insurance because they don't arrange for the financing care by the federal government as the insurer. That was my questions about vouchers that never got answered. There's also an independent limits explosion NHS as the mechanism can become as medical malpractice form, tort reform, expedite the FDA approval, promoting prescription drugs from Canada. Basically, any healthcare fix can be topical that explodes limits cross-apply. The impact they did from the extra TR is any one of the 100 proposals healthcare fixes you've seen as an advantage capital is now the cheap ground for tacking on theatrics. And from a health insurance topic to do something about healthcare topic today, can't prepare for infinite domestic action combining unfamiliar ways because there's no unified neg ground bank for that. Their next argument about biological health, nothing about RT interpretation requires health to have one static interpretation. We agree health can have multiple different interpretations, but it's not a question of national health insurance. That was all explained about the limits decided across the file. The office I did in the overview explaining limits in this way. It destroys any reasonable ability for the negative team to anticipate and engage applications that ensures terrible backfire checks based on a race to the most obscure philosophical marches which internally ensures all their enslavement. To make good arguments, you don't solve our ground arguments. That was all the disjointed arguments about being able to solve. You don't solve your reasonability arguments given all the offense. But counterplay. Counterplay solves 100% of case of Lincoln piece evidence indicates that the financing care can happen at the state and federal level. We solved their abnormal implementation arguments because we included the second portion of the advocacy text in the counterplay text. They have no reason why we can't fiat those things as well as we get reciprocal black utopian and fiat because they get to do it as well, which means that we get to have the debates over the political processes, etc. Yes, we are not black individuals, but it's a question of the political process implemented in the very first which the counterplay text indicates that we are deceived. The Black Panther activism was able to solve. They say so you solve the net benefits. They said no, this will be more than one in our way. You definitely do trade off with the federalism. Just because our evidence indicates that federal intervention into healthcare necessarily trade off with activist internal links. We have a great cooperative federalism spillover argument, which will be explained in the one another. Permutation do both. It still links to the disaction, still allows the Fed to take credit for healthcare reform. Permutation do the counterpart severs the United States government as an actor, which is simply not fair. The obligation debt, since line is right, then we have an obligatory debt not to let the DA impacts happen. This card says that consequences of actions matter, which means that DA is a relative opportunity cost that has to factor into your decision. States have a greater obligation. They were the ones that tried to uphold slavery and literally seceded to protect that right. The counterpart is payment for those arguments. This isn't a solvency deficit. It's a counterpart because we get the black utopian frame described above because it's a question of remedying black health disparities and inequities, which is what their piece of evidence is about. It's key to reciprocal fiat, which is the only basis for fairness. Lines goes back to Walker and 17. The issues of rights for racial minorities, not like how federalism works, division of slavery, segregation, or worse, from the historical circumstances of the Constitution protected slavery. The failure of federalism respect race does not entail every instance of federalism has such a negative outcome. Federalism excels in unitary governments by providing space for dissent. Federalism promoting pluralism, power sharing, contrast to democracy based on the majoritarianism. Majorities can be wrong, national majority time. Cyber justice, federalism, press, diversity, increase the platform which minorities can make claims to a larger policy. Their next argument is the Allen Bell evidence. Allen Bell, this evidence is just saying that co-intel-pro is bad for Black Panther initiatives. This supercharges all of our Fed bad arguments. The states are more able to protect initiatives from co-option because they can hide plans from the federal government as proven by our federalism advantage. State movements exist now and can be expanded in progressive direction. They link to their state backed argument because they implement federal health policy. Gherkin and 10 federalism can be a source of progressive resistance. People assume that Congress has changed law. Everything changed in Congress depends heavily on states to implement federal policy. The Fed doesn't have enough resources to deal with immigration or administer health care. Relies on the states too much more as progressive can influence this policy by simply refusing a partner spills over covenants. When one state regulates it affects anything where spills are a tool for encouraging compromise. Spills thus force state and local officials to do what they're supposed to do. Politics, find a common negotiated compromise that everyone can listen. So the next argument is the transnational solidarity argument. The new plank that I bullshot on the counterpart text on the 1 and C indicates that states can engage in these transnational solidarity movements and they are much more effective in human rights spillover arguments because states have much more credibility when it comes to protecting the rights of minority groups than the federal government under Donald fucking J. Trump, which proves that we're able to solve. That's our Traverse and Galbraith evidence. The Galen evidence just says that revolutionary actions are good and are able to spur utopian movements. The counterpart results in functioning the same action as the act, just a different act. Their evidence does set up a link differential to be able to solve state action as perceived in the nationally spirit on 17 federal limited scope of authority. Can take the board legislation or adopting international conventions of their own as well as 10% will adopt the CEDAW. Cities are arriving up in collection too. Global states traditional training overtaken by events of the ground cities and states are going to be playing like global stage foreign affairs. Federals will help lead actors to understand normal station and subnational role in global affairs. The case page extend the Iglesias piece of evidence. It answers their role. The ballot argument details are key to health policies. I did the explanation on the framework page. It will solve their desire spillover arguments. How do they spill over to solving things like community health and debate? It doesn't make sense the connection between the action of a plan and themselves. That proves our extraterritoriality arguments because they different changes to be able to solve. We didn't read a framework argument in the counterpoint with this one, which means our conditionality arguments don't necessarily take it out. Instead, the piece of Fitzsimmons evidence indicates that scenario planning is necessary in order to engage in the burden rejoinder and ensure clash by both the negative and the affirmative, which proves that you should always evaluate the dissets and counterpoints. The only way to solve. Otherwise, we don't have scenario planning in the first place, which internally turns all their process debate, good arguments, and necessary to solve extend the of Michelle's evidence, our evidence indicates that you two must come first because every human life is infinitely possible. This is not an all lives matter argument, but rather it says that you should take into relative consideration when the threat of extinction is on the table, which is distinct from saying that black lives, distinct from not saying that black lives do matter. Our evidence indicates that because it can necessarily kill all individuals, it will solve our agency exists argument. The next one indicates that extinction is not happening on a large level for black individuals. Yes, there is massive amounts of violence, but that is not unseen as on part of extinction. We said they can't necessarily compare them to psychological violence. Our warrant evidence is based on the psychological impact of any grammatical grammars, which our evidence indicates is simply not based in reality because it requires a psychoanalysis, which is an unfalsifiable theory, which necessarily answers the impact. Read the card. It says psych.
Ready? Why is us saying that Republicans winning in the status quo is inevitable mean that that status quo is always permanent?
I didn't say that.
Okay, cool, fine.
Yes, the plan changes that. You cause impeachment. You said that causes blackout in North Korea, which is bad.
Gotcha. Okay, I see.
You
didn't
filter
even
yourself.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So you say that we cannot fiat delivery of care. Like, why is that bad? What happened?
So there are two different literature bases when it comes to talking about healthcare. Insurance begs the question of the financial arrangement of the United States, i.e. what taxes we use, how the care is financed, whereas through things like vouchers, single payer, public option, etc. Whereas care delivery is much different. It's like a question of what services are provided, how those services are provided, what infrastructure is used. Like example, private hospitals, rural hospitals, CHCs, etc. Very distinct literature bases, very distinct consequences when it comes to policy.
Okay, and so I'm wondering why those debates are good.
Why national health insurance debates are good?
No, why that focus of national health insurance, why those debates are good.
I mean, you've made limits arguments about if necessary.
No, this is about education, not about limits. Why is that education
Those are kind of
valuable?
internal links to each other. Our limits arguments indicates that the only way we can get education about the question of national health insurance, which you all
Yeah,
have said
I'm wondering
is important.
why that education is good.
I mean, you have said it is important to have process debates over
Yeah, but
the
we think
question of
different
bill paying
process
insurance.
debates are good, so why are your process debates good?
They're the same process debates as according to your counter interpretation that you cross-apply that says NHI is a bill paying activity.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Your counter interpretation that you cross-apply to
Uh-huh.
the NHA services page says that NHI is a government provision.
Well,
of
while
financing
allowing us to
for
specify the delivery of care by a private party, which is the Black Panther Party, correct?
Yes, that is not our violation. Our violation has to do with the services you said you fiat in the cross-section of the 1AC, such as
But that's
housing
based on the
services,
private
social services, etc.
provider, right? So that's literally the card says we can
But you
specify the
fiat
delivery of care.
specific services, not who the provider of that care is. Those are distinct
Okay, you
things.
think of those things, okay, sure.
They are.
so-
Like, there's a difference between saying
Yeah,
you pay
cool,
for
cool,
certain
cool.
hospitals,
How do we link to
certain hospitals,
distancing, et cetera?
between saying
How do we
pay
link to
for
distancing on
affiliate
framework?
services.
Answer my question now, what is the link to distancing on framework?
What do you mean?
You said you also link to distancing, I'm wondering how.
Yeah, you still argue that there should be a different control of how healthcare functions in this quo. You don't actually do that. You don't change the political arrangement of the government in this round. We all agree
No,
fiat's not
okay,
real.
why
but
do you
it's the
think you're
same
entitled to
distancing.
black fiat?
Because
Are you
it's
black?
No, that's not our argument.
So then why do you get black fiat?
Because if it's truly a comparison.
How do
of
you, okay, but then how do you allow black people to be the agents of the resolution if you are the one affirming these things?
Because we're comparing different ways of like what actor.
Have you ever
finances
heard the
Black
saying, there's no
Panthers thing.
part-time Panthers?
Yeah, we broke this Black Panthers
Okay.
halfway before you all did.
Okay, but then you say that we can't have it under the topic that you broke it, okay. Cool, back on the dis ad, what is the internal link between saying that, you know, we'll be fine.
That's the one that's hard.
You can literally set the rookie up.
Federalism.
possible dissent to relying on a Trump-led federal government, they have conceded the uniqueness argument that subnational movements across the country are gaining a foothold in national political discourse, which means even if they win any arguments about the federal government being key to parts of the affirmative, there's only a risk that those subnational movements are sufficient to solve at least part of it in the status quo, which means if we win a small dissent to affirming the Trump regime, it's sufficient reason to vote negative. You should not allow the 1AR to extrapolate on these 2AC arguments. We predicated our block strategy based on the lack of coverage in the 2AC, especially in context of this affirmative. The 1NC uniqueness argument says Trump administration cannot function without willing collaborators, which is a conceded uniqueness argument. This is due to the past few decades of the right steadily devolving political power to the states. The counterplan strategically reappropriates that to force more progressive policies, which is something that they functionally cannot do because their advocacy statement affirms the federal government. This means that if we win the AF is worse for movements in the counterplan, you vote AF even if there's a solvency debt, or you vote negative even if there's a solvency deficit, because those movements are critical to solvency. They're getting a foot in the door now. The Fed requires state and local enforcements to push things like deportation, drug incarceration, policing, mass incarcerations, and a litany of other conservative policies. They don't have card one that assumes the Trump administration, which we do, which should frame how you view the entirety of the link debate. The permutation doesn't solve it because it still affirms Trump. He still gets credit for the plan, which makes him look less racist, even if there's not a specific trade-off argument or Trump doesn't implement the plan himself. States and cities perceive the plan as Trump moving against his current actions, which means they are less likely to implement progressive policies in the status quo. Anti-racist struggles should reorient towards pursuing sub-federal resistance against Trump. Weston Bobo in 17, this is a moment of urgency in which we've all got to be examining how we are engaged. Where's the smart bet for making a difference in a context of Republican control House and the Senate, the White House, of all levels of institutional power at the federal level or in the right-wing hands? What do? We can learn something from our right-wing. When neoliberalism was hegemonic, they went federalist, so we can have massive sanctuary institutions, local defensive plan, Hereford defense when the police are shooting black youth. American system does provide wiggle room. White supremacy is always the fundamental feature. You see how deeply constitutive it is. Young folks understand that on the local and state level, we've got to hit it hard. It's got to be multiracial and connected to struggles against empire.
They can't link out of this with the midterms link term because that doesn't happen until later this year.
The midterms link term doesn't get them out of this because it doesn't happen until later this year, and they have no specific evidence that says it would cause any kind of spillover to local action. There is an external impact. Only building upon federalist progressivism can build a sustainable base for checking future and present fascism and general conservative fuckery, racism, totalitarianism, and etc. It's not just Trump. The federal government itself is controlled by racists. Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan will still be around in 3 years. This debate should be a question of who parts a roadmap for progressives to make future political change. Absent that, movements will fracture their focus into a diversity of issue-specific targets and levels of governments, which prevents effective resistance. There is an external environment impact that the 2EC drops. State policies are adhering to Paris and creating emissions restriction in the status quo. I shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. Trump policy causes extinction, the destruction of the biosphere, limited subsidies to fossil fuel companies, etc. The line by line, the first argument is this piece of Alan Bell evidence. There is a distinction between the federal government viewing members of the Black Panther Party as a threat to national security and them being required by federal and the federal requirements being the internal link to the political prisoners argument. Just because they're viewed as a national security threat does not mean that that changes to the federal structure are necessary. A lot of those people are in prison in state institution, which means there's no either they do not solve or there's no reason that the counterplan does not solve because it creates kind of progressive movements in the status quo. Even if you believe this argument on the level of truth or they have some creative spin, it was marked before the warrant, so we should get new answers in the Twin R. If they blow this up, the disad solves the terminal impact to it. If we win that there is progressive momentum and resistance to Trump in the status quo, then it's at least somewhat likely that it can solve decarceration. And you can vote on the external impact. State health policies track Trump and conservatives in the future. Danan in 17, federalism as a tool can use to be promote policy that expands opportunity areas, income disparities, and practice activists cut their teeth in states. National policy needs state support. Conservatives are using state power to weaken social rights, essential to rebuilding the nation's core. Progressivism work is laying a base. Public health initiatives are essential to the second to be leveraged for significant national gains, even in areas where federal officials take the lead. States still oppose policy. Small groups can have disproportionate impact on the election year. Translating the state victories crucial to the next round of redistricting. Control of the House will deepen the bench of millennial activist politicians. Battle need to fight at every level with multiple strategies. State and local level can have an outsized impact. States are being put in the ground. The counterplan creates uniqueness for that and revitalizes it. Gherkin and Redsnevs in 17, progressive still have access. One of the most powerful weapons is federalism. This has allowed them to affect national debates. Congress relies on states and localities to carry out their policies. Without those, the feds cannot enforce immigration law. Environmental policy, changing policies is only possible if states lend a hand forcing debates. The conservatives would rather avoid resisting herbs within still progressive backgrounds. The coming of healthcare wars, Republicans will devolve authority. Trump don't have many sticks to which to plunge it. Uncooperative states, this creates a heavy incentive for compromise. California, New York, and Illinois can shield constituents of policy. States and cities can take advantage of spillover form of eugenics, but they're also a tool for encouraging compromise. The second argument that they allow for mobilizing, one is that our internal link is not specific to the Black Panther Party. It's specific to a wide range of movements that are happening in the status quo, specifically on the policy level of state local interest, which means even if they win 100% layers of this link argument, it doesn't take out or turn the counterplan. They cannot win this argument if we win the uniqueness debate. Cross-apply the West evidence. Political power has been decentralized for decades from liberals and conservatives. Even if they galvanize some resistance, they still seek the wrong levels of power and fall prey to all of our critiques of the federal government, like interest convergence, which is the 1NC evidence about lobbying subcommittees, which means the act gets diluted to the point of ineffectiveness and certainly cannot chart a path forward for resistance to Trump. Now, the troubled history of federalism shouldn't prevent its use as a check against Trump. Kirkman and 17 progressives are long been skeptical of federalism. That is a mistake. Federalism doesn't have a political valence. It's an extraordinary powerful weapon. A source of progressive resistance. Congress depends heavily on states' progressive force to shut the national agenda for granting debates. GOP control federal government can't put cops on every breed or bureaucrats at every desk. It needs state officials. If states refuse, Republicans will be forced to compromise. They can effectively nullify federal law simply by withdrawing enforcement when cities refuse to assist homeland security deportation. There is little the federal government can do. Social movements need pragmatic insiders, not just principled outsiders. There is an external immigrants impact. Trump's anti-immigrant agenda is rooted in a legacy of imperialism and ruins millions of lives. Successful local resistance defangs his broader agenda, but more mobilization is key, which only the counterplan provides. Shabab, while in 17 I spared out of the military state sweep of over 700 unconvicted immigrants indicating Gazelle strike created crushing momentum and ramping up the deportation. We've seen enlist local police officers, new detention facilities, expanding the definition of renewable aliens, discussions around mobilizing 100,000 National Guard troops as deportation measures is getting serious consideration. Rapid escalation by the Trump administration is possible because the entire framework has already been set by accomplished nothing except to tear apart families, desolate economies, and repressive regimes created by decades of imperialist trade and economic policy of the U.S. multilateral corporations to profit. Mark the profit.
How much time?
Roll, 8, 11.
You said you weren't going for national health insurance, right? The T, national health insurance?
The National Health Service.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, not one.
Yeah. The extra note on the other page was just in case you all, like, very go for that extra money.
Yeah, midterms. T, framework, timeline, period.
Can you say all that again?
Pace, you said, T, framework, timeline, period.
For the first dissatisfaction.
Is there a check?
Do you want to see established a free healthcare for all black people in this space and more broadly through funding the United States federal government by implementing the Black Panther Party user theory, medical self-defense, time changing how to values the medical industrial complex while also delivering health services to resolve death gaps between black and non-black people. This regards four steps: alternative institution building, health as a heuristic, politics, and inclusion, archive for revival. There are three case arguments to frame every full in this debate. One is black death. The plan is the only way to ensure quality of healthcare for black people. The market is they can never do that. You have to privilege saving black lives over all lives. One of the answers to you also health in this. We create health in this space every year. Our argument has to answer why they create a healthy space for debate now. This fact, Panther Party established health is something we do in the everyday. Understanding health not as biological but sociological. All their impacts are inevitable because the results of anti-blackness Trump. There's Trump arguments or if there are other arguments about last year or results of the societal change that have happened. They are missing the vote on the entirety of how the case functions. Our rule about they do not meet our rule about. We have an impact turning the entirety of process debate beginning from the beginning of the debate. We say that this resolution should be about care, not about insurance. Our more evidence says we're able to cultivate a grammar of black pandas circulating in this space between black people and among black people to create a collective political arrangements that allow us to deliver care on into the extinction focus first argument. It's a strategic prioritization of white life. Look at what just happened after Katrina. The utility calculus that policymakers use it. A lot of white people say we are the better utility frame in the ending that our prioritization of black life that is done above. Also, the debates aren't just death isn't distributing equally. There are arguments about arguments that they'll make about body counts don't matter because they don't understand that some bodies are counted with the most calculations are do not have value with the most calculus. Like their Warren argument doesn't make sense. Warren isn't based in psychoanalysis. They must prove that Card doesn't say this. All our impacts prove our impacts prove we are falsifiable. Also scenario planning. Their scenario planning is in the wrong world and of the wrong things. I'll explain this on framework in the black process debate is good, and I'll do that on the framework. We'll go to it now.
Actually, this ends.
No link that Trump want to take credit for the plan. Black Panther is seen as a terrorist organization. They consider this argument, this double terror argument doesn't make sense. We said the Black Panther can mobilize against Trump if they want to, not that they have to. It's a federalism is true anyway. They link to the that means we have an extinction scenario that always there goes to go to topicality. All our specific bad arguments on answer on federal control. Do now our counter-interpretation now should the national health insurance be financed by the government with the provider or delivery of care. Before our definition for knowledge of the PhD repression, the basic U.S. healthcare system are affluent from the U.S. pays for everything. Only the difference in respecifying the implementation of healthcare is done by the Black Panther Party. Black Panther Party. One we cross-section on the one see plain text rules. We are instrumental defense of resolution, government funded healthcare counter-interpretation. We affirm that through the topic through black field, which topic action through abnormal invitation all to the black field. Good debate here. 1A allows us to think from the position of thought the government has an intention to constructed to overlook the humanities of black people. Also, be black field also to construct a grammar of self-regard which describe black pain, how we think, act, and speak are informed by distinguishing qualities anti-black violence. C. Engages in practice of feminism because the state is inevitable. We need Black Panther Party's practical and ideological approach to health, which are producing materials like health through the skepticism from the state. Also, de-archive revival black theologies open imagination analysis to envision a new political climate in order to restructure our interpretation of the Black Panther Party and anti-blackness. There are arbitrary exclusion, which is worse than arbitrary inclusion. There's no rational basis for their version of the topic debate exists before fiat was created, proving their interpretation of equals arbitrary. They say our no means is all answer the limit debates here. Word black and within limits topics the way limits the topic the way black is constituted through object actor mechanism. The firm that's report evidence aids more predictable debates with the black people talk about the relationship to national health insurance. Also allows for topical reactivates also to focus on Black Panther Party and the relationship to the state and other activist organizations, which solve their activist organization the federalism argument to see the negative over limits and restrictions are debates about normal means, which always black decision making ability to conceptualize extra legal structure just by fines. Voting next terms limits, we try to meet them in the middle. Their interpretation proves their arbitrary exclusion of anything they predetermined to be irrelevant, justifying teams reading larger structural critiques and right to the margin. Education outweighs any limits, and in-depth education is inevitable. Single person is the only argument on this topic. They get ground based on provider access to black utopianism, bad black Panthers, bad focus on black health. We are the best topic education because our evidence that we are care. The care is the heart of this topic, not insurance. They only focus on who fits the bill. They don't just the underlying reason why black We're not extraterritorial interpretation, nationalism centered around the delivery of care with a restriction on just U.S. information. Our Black Panther Act just specifies that the UNLV and Harvard just in fact proves Black female turn their normal possession of female assumes no means we can search our imaginations go. Huh?
Yeah, go to sleep.
The account plan saturation of Black Purple because it assumes they know defense of no means not Black people. There's no link to the day. There's no link to this because there are links to the concepts have no means of the plane, which means the account plan is plan plus, and there's no trade-off. This creates competition. They have that means per do both all 50. We can have all 50 states and the federal government do both. The plan is solved midterms because Congress can share the cost of themselves. Federalism because they can share the cost of the plan. However, this states account plan they link to midterms of benefits as net debt of slavery lines evidence of faith to hold both the state and federal government accountable. It also is national security. They said they governments want to control. We have to control the anti-Black values and construct their federal programs like the COINTELPRO that views the Black Panther Party as terrorist organization. Also, political prisoners and mental health. We saw by releasing political prisoners to try back to their front because the states. We saw the eternal effect of federalism arguments and arguments like conservative fuckery and totalitarianism, and there is no answer in our affirmative liberty. Produce alternative institutions for revolution groups that can protect Black people from the impacts they continue. We can mobilize extra medical advocacy, say, surveys, checks for the abuse from the state. The Black Panther is key to entity to help just Black people, not just Black people, but everyone through a focus on social health and full inclusion. Historically, since the Black Panther work through Young, Lord Star, Brown Bears, etc. This rule is to be same with the contemporary groups like Black Lives Matter, Stand Your Right. They also stated for the two they say that we literally mobilize Black Panthers running for office and engaging local state politics to solve their using bottom approaches don't lead to salutary.
Now go to the counter plan, so they don't get black fiat.
They can't solve a Black fiat when they're not Black and crime, but they're kind of Black. They're understanding Black fiat, so no means just focus on. They only focus on paying for insurance, stifles the value of theory of Babylon, which aviation proposes care.
We have 9:55 I think.
Questions? When did you transition into that? Or did you not enter to be? When was your switch? No, they had two key options. You just, you've been on the same page? That's true.
cool if I went to the restroom?
I recommend walking. Go on a freaking ball and not be able to do
I'm
things.
trying to get those gains though, you know, get my cardio up. I haven't got enough steps in today.
If you say small bursts, there's actually, if you're like very sedentary, very small bursts.
Being
It's actually
significant.
better on your body to do that than it is to run for a long run.
Oh, sprinting?
Sprint.
Yeah.
I disagree.
Alright, is everyone good for an order? The midterms DA? The framework, like extra TT stuff, all kind of got collapsed in one flow, so I'm just gonna do that today. Federalism, states, states. Alright, is anyone not ready?
The double church should function as a tiebreaker if they win any of their black fiat arguments, because in the world of the app, they have conceded that the Black Panther Party activists that they inspire and necessarily result in are the ones who become political activists who change the composition of the United States government that allow the Democrats to win and push for impeachment. Would they have said that impeachment leads to a lash out on North Korea, which causes extinction, which it must fall in their impact framing calculus, because it was an argument that the 2AC made, which means they can't get out of any of their utilitarian arguments. This is a reason why you should reject the affirmative, because they have told themselves, because the scroll will result in the GOP winning, which prevents impeachment arguments. They have not made an internal link differential that the GOP would impeach Trump, which means that he's try or die for voting negative, because we don't result in this. At the very worst, if you end up concluding that the state's counterplan does not get their black fiat arguments, then this becomes a net benefit to the counterplan. Or if you do conclude that the counterplan doesn't do it, you kick the counterplan from being the 2 and R, because the status quo is always an option, even if we are dispositional, because they read a permutation which is able to solve, which serve as a tiebreaker about their fiat arguments. The T debate, I'm only going to go for the extra topicality argument about black fiat, because our argument is that you do not just get to fiat non-USMG actors make this utopian new world that spikes out of all disads and counterplans, because it fundamentally makes it impossible to be negative. That is proven by all of our limits and ground arguments about destroying unified net ground and limits arguments. To be true, we should debate the question of enslavement in terms of a national health insurance, which is their broke piece of evidence. Then you should always defer to process debates being good. The Iglesias evidence that was extended on case in the T debate in the truancy indicates that details matter to these debates, because the only way that we can have an in-depth discussion about healthcare policy and how only said results in their prisoner's argument, which is our argument. They've functionally resulted in new COINTELPRO as per all of our link evidence on federalism, which proves that their solvency deficits the counterpart are really disad to the app. There's mass mobilization against these conservative policies in squad by states, which means there's only a risk that the app disrupts it. Their fiat argument, the Cornell West evidence indicates that it changes the way you frame it. It's not a question of things like agencies and activists only, but it's a question of how states and localities are responding to these policies and how they're framing their infrastructure around them, which means even if they result in more activists, they don't have the resources or infrastructures to be able to solve this. Only states and localities do, which is the uniqueness argument is able to solve. Second, their blind text only says for black people only, which means that it cannot solve things like the immigrants disad because the Black Panther Party resources would not go to them, which means they can't solve the mass deportations arguments. You don't get to fiat of disad to prove all of our extra top calories. I don't have to do any more work here because the 1AR was too light on it. You should allow new 2AR spins on it because 2AR strategy is predicated off of 1AR mistakes. The counterplan solves 100% of case. They have card zero that says states cannot do Black Panther initiatives, nor can they fully fund or that they can't fully fund and support these initiatives, where we have read very good evidence that says the states can do health policy and is able to resolve in this same thing. Their first argument of presentation both in the counterplan being Plan Plus makes absolutely no fucking sense because we changed the act of the plan from the federal government to the state's government, which proves that the permutation links to the disad still because they still require federal action, which triggers all the links I said on the other page, which is able to solve because it's a question of whether or not re-centralization occurs. The state counterplan maintains decentralization because it relies on states and localities to implicate it. They say it links to the midterms disad. I did that on there. If we end up evaluating midterms disad internal terms, then you just kick the counterplan for me and evaluate this squad. The national security COINTELPRO arguments. What is the COINTELPRO argumentary reason why the federal government is bad? They conceded a very good piece of 2NC evidence that indicates that the state governments are able to hide their policies and fight back against co-optation by individual agencies and agencies like COINTELPRO, which means states are necessary to solve, where the plan necessarily disrupts those efforts by giving the federal government the information necessary. Is able to solve. Two, it says we solve the political prisoners arguments because we still Black Panther initiatives, which there are evidence says is enough to spill over to solve those political prisoners arguments. Look, here's a come to Jesus moment. All of their 2AC evidence is like 3 lines long and not very good on describing the link differential arguments, which means you should give the leeway on the counter being able to solve. They say we don't get black fiat arguments. One, the 1AC evidence just says it's a question about the communications, about the agrammatical disparities on black health. The counterplan still does this because it forefronts the question of Black Panther Party initiatives, as well as the question of shifting health away from a biomedical model to a question of a practical sense, which is what all of their evidence says is necessary to have the discussion of health in the first place. It's not a question of the racial makeup of Michigan GW. Second, it's a fairness question. We give reciprocal fiat in order to test the process of the app because it's the only way in which to have a substantive debate over the questions of what the affirmative is able to do. I don't need to go to the case page. They can see there's no spillover between debate and their activism. It wasn't explained by our state. I just explain it. I assume you saw the officer again?
You started? How much is it? 213. 213. quo. Then federalism counterclaim.
I'm sorry, what was that for the chief?
All right, case, midterms, framework, federalism, counterclaim. Actually, I'm realizing, no, I think having the two will make them go faster today.
Famous last words.
What'd you just say?
Famous last words.
You think so?
I believe
I'm about to flame
I
you, my man.
believe you're gonna be speaking, Charles.
That 2 was not enough to end my career. Let's do this. For what is all free healthcare for black people? We have to keep black people as kids solving two things that they have never response to. One, agreement for black pain, but also solving black people being in the position of the other. They've conceived the role of that is who produces the best care for black people in this space. Our education here is better to making black people better actors within the world because we can archive the tactics that the Black Panthers had, but also change the perception of them so we can become better perception of them from a paramilitary organization. This solves a couple of things: alternative institution building, social health heuristic, but also policies of inclusion in the archive revival of the Black Panther Party. There's no answer to this. They don't get black fiat, which will frame why they cannot solve anything because all their structure relies on them getting a link to a normal means of the affirmative under normal means, which is why they tried to say that trying to go for framework in the 2 to try and concretize their strategy in the first place. But they consider that this is an act of coin self-run that tries to undo the centering of the agency of black people within this space and takes away the autonomy of black people. You see that you are not black, and therefore you are just blackface pretending to be a fucking panther in this space, which is the appropriation of our performance here. The all see that you prioritize black life over any other impacts. When we say black people, that means that you still vote for the fucking affirmative. They say that you can keep the counter plans for them. However, that means it's only status quo versus the affirmative. And then one sees an entire fucking 9-minute impact turn to the status quo. So the counter plan can't solve the affirmative. Then you must vote affirmative in this space. To make sure there is no double turn. What we said is that there's no link to the Trump credibility. This happened because you cannot make any predictive claims about what would happen because the Black Panthers would change the political climate, which they can make moves to pressure the government. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will get him impeached. They don't have a card that says that. We didn't read a card that says that, which was our argument. We also argue that you don't get this dissad because it assumes that you are entitled to a certain specific form of ground. If we win our framework argument, means that you have to throw away the dissad, and the counter plan in the first place, which is why you should vote affirmative. And federalism links to this was dropped to me at the 2 arc if you don't find it to be persuasive. It means that this debate is sexually washed. Let's get to the framework to be our counter to the framework to topple action with admirable. This is key to black decision making because we consider black people as the agents of the resolutions that are being passively acted upon, which means that we can gain that education where what we would do in the real world to become better advocates. Well, their skills are too position that we will always be policymakers and lawyers, but not activists that are acting outside the state and technically engaged with them. That this shows the internal impact to all their arguments. I mean, because the impact and process debate is political education, which is what we provide. Also, they see that we're key to stasis because the stasis of the resolution is care, not access to insurance, which is why our process is actually better for topical education than theirs, or else we can never democratize health practice. We literally will allow people to have debates about what it means to democratize health practice, create lay networks of doctors, of how to maintain clinics, how to engage the state, of how to engage with other activist groups. They are not answering. It doesn't explode limits. Black and keeps it because we're still saying that you have to affirm natural health insurance, but also because blocking means that we can focus specifically on the way that black people interact with the resolution, but also they haven't seen our ground argument, which is that you get utopianism bad, Black Panther Party bad, you also get healthcare focus bad, which is the core controversy of the fucking topic in care, which means that we are not impossible to debate and you're not entitled to the ground that you want to have because that is not the centrality of the topic. You also drop that team pushes us to read Wilderson ass and therefore will explode limits more, which means that you have to go to affirmative and prefer reasonability over competing interpretations, or else you will literally destroy the way that we can engage in debate. We are the middle ground here now. Counter interim on the team was that natural health insurance allows us to have the government funded but also specified delivery by a private provider, which was our knowledge, which is why the Black Panther Party can be allowed and is reasonably included in the topic. It's key to our spouse's argument and our specific education also subsets are good and not and do not completely explode limits, or else there's an all lives matter dissent, which we've impact turned via the case argument. But they also see that we solve the impact to all lives matter because solving for black health solves for other people's health reasons that we're not extra topical, but also
They don't do any of this. They didn't go through.
what? listen to me. That is that they don't get the dissad. They don't get any of the dissads with the counterplans in this debate on federalism. We solve the fucking terminal impacts of federalism. They can see that we create alternative institutions of the Black Panther Party that can allow us to protect Black people through extra medical advocacy, but also they conceded that historically this allowed the Black Panthers to engage with other groups and engage in their concerns. The Young Lords Party, the Brown Berets, and Star, all groups that work with the Black Panther Party to produce protections in a new revolutionary bloc. They also conceded that Black Panthers were running for local and state office to engage in analysis on that level. But literally, you have to think about this. If we provide federal funds, we are using those federal funds and rerouting them to revolutionary groups, which solves their resource argument on the federalism, on the federalism argument. They say that we can't stop the police. Yes, we can, because if the COINTELPRO is a federal program, and that means they cannot solve the net benefit of political prisoners, because even if you got them out of state prison, then they would go back to federal prison because they are state terrorists in the first place. But also, the feds would crack down on the state counterplan because they would say on the state counterplan by saying no, because this represents a national security threat, which is why you have to have this federal oversight. Well, we have net benefits to our affirmative and the permutation, but they don't have but we solve their net benefits relatively better than the other way around. The counterplan cannot solve because you do not get Black fiat. There's never real response. Other than matter of the racial makeup, but it means that Black people are no longer the agents and lose autonomy in the decision-making process because you can co-opt that, but also lose that autonomy, which is why the Parachute Belt solves. But also, all other shit assumes normal means, which if we win our free market means that there is no trade-off, and that is why it is Parent Plus. We mainly to this that we saw the general impact. We also allow for local politics because we can engage in new politics via the Black Panthers in the first place. Listen, listen. We are literally winning that the state's counterplan cannot solve COINTELPRO. That is a federal jurisdiction issue, but it also means that we would be able to redirect the federal funds to use it against anti-Black policymakers because we create extra state and federal activists.
Our card doc should be sent out. The bark is a giant